Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Jason Paulus. I'm the Adult Services Coordinator at the Iowa City Public Library. Tonight's talk will start really shortly here, but just a quick note to explain that we'll be taking your questions through the Q&A button that's up at the top of your screen. If you're having any technical trouble tonight, please use that function to let us know, and we'll try to answer that with tech help within the Zoom software there in the Q&A. So thank you all for joining, and I'm so glad to have these Obermann conversations at the Iowa City Public Library again. Welcome everyone, thanks.
Thank you, Jason. My name's Jennifer New, and I'm the Associate Director at the Obermann Center for Advanced Studies. And we've enjoyed having this relationship with the public library for the past, I don't know, probably 5 years or so. Running these conversations there usually in the afternoon. And the purpose of them is to put University of Iowa researchers, scholars, artists into conversation with folks from the community around shared topics of interest and passion. And this fall, this is our first conversation. Usually we will have gotten started by now, but just in kind of letting the year get going and see what there might be an interest in and a desire for, we kind of held back on the programming and decided to go with a short series under the kind of umbrella of wonder and awe. So this is the first one. The second one will be looking at people who do field work and have been doing research in fairly far-flung places, including research on the sea nomads in Southeast Asia, and somebody who is the director of dives for the Monterey Bay Sea Aquarium and literally goes all over the world diving under the oceans. And then early next year, there will be one on looking at death and dying. So with this first one, we are diving in, if I can keep going with that word and that metaphor, around labor. And I want to explain a little bit where this came from. So I've been aware of Christopher Rashim McMillan's work for a little while, and we'll introduce everybody here. But I know that Chris is both in dance and has a background in religious studies. And I was so intrigued by that. And I emailed him and I say, hey, and I just said, hey, what do you think about talking about? I was like, yeah. And his work, as you'll hear later at the moment, is looking particularly around sacredness of labor. And so then we started down this route of labor and who did we want to involve? So here we are with our 3 speakers tonight. So in the order that we're actually going to start speaking in, David Borger-German is the executive pastor at the Sanctuary Community Church here in Iowa City. And Christy Nabhan-Warren is in the departments of religious studies and also gender, women, and sexuality studies. And Christopher is in both gender, women, sexuality studies and dance. Have I forgot? I'll let you guys, if I forgot anything, you fill in, okay? So we're gonna chat for a while with some questions that we came up with, and then we will have some time for question and answers. So as we think about ways that we have lost as a culture this kind of sense of any wonder around our own labor, and many of us are kind of hampered more by labor than in a place of wonder around it. We want to each of us start with a moment of wonder or awe that we have experienced to kind of serve as an anchor point for what we even mean by these words, and then to reflect on these concepts with regards to labor, both from your own work and or your own research. And David, if you could get us started, that'd be great.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. And it's a delight to be with all of you, being the operative word on Zoom. It works a lot. So thank you. I want to begin with a story from nature. My wife and I visited Sequoia National Park in June of 2019, which feels like 2 decades ago at this point. We experienced many, many delightful moments on that trip, but one of the most memorable was on a less traveled trail. We hiked and we came across a group of giant sequoias called the Founders Group. The Founders Group is dedicated to those who helped found the park, thus its name. And it consists of 6 giant sequoias growing fairly close together in a sort of circle. And I don't know what it was exactly about this group of trees. Maybe it was the way they're kind of congregated all together. Maybe it was the way the sunlight was cascading through the upper canopy. Maybe it was the silence on the path on which Allie and I were the only hikers, but in awe. And it was as though my body sensed something quite awesome. It was not behaving in the regular way. I had to consciously take breaths. Otherwise, I don't know that I would breathe. And then I felt like I couldn't walk unless I effortfully engaged my legs, willing each step closer to the trees. It was an incredible place to behold. It was a holy place, and I was awestruck. So as we're exploring tonight, the connection between awe and labor and movement, I wanted to share this story because I wanted to first draw attention to our bodies and the feelings we experience that affect our bodies. I tend to associate the feeling of awe in our bodies with a sort of quiet stillness. And so it strikes me as a fun tension to explore in how we consider ties to labor and action and work. So I am a pastor of a non-denominational Christian church called Sanctuary, and we're sort of a strange hybrid of liberal progressive values wrapped in the cool casual style of contemporary American Christianity. I often preach in jeans and a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, something like this. And one of my roles is that I lead people into worship, which means that I am a facilitator of awe. That is my work. I hesitate to say it like that because it emphasizes the human responsibility or agency in the production of awe, as though that might be a reliable enterprise. But I do think there is a responsibility and an agency when it comes to awe. For example, I think a good, effective preacher can really help a congregation experience awe, which in the Christian context of worship, we attribute that to the divine presence. At the same time, there's something about awe that I think transcends human responsibility and agency. I cannot claim any credit for what is truly a gift, like the Founders Grove in Sequoia National Park, for which none of us thankfully can claim credit. Now, Christians call the gift, they call that grace, something unlooked for, undeserved. And if you prefer a different word, we could call it creation or life. And those terms are all perfectly adequate, I think, to start to look at awe. Perhaps all of life is worthy of awe if we're paying close enough attention. So when I think about my work, though, I guess I want to offer attention as we start to unfold this conversation in thinking about, and I'd love to take that even further. I would love to think about Sanctuary as a place that facilitates awe and then helps make people generous. It leads to working for justice and liberation in the world. How about reparations, a Green New Deal, rights for workers, all of that and more. But if I'm honest, I have to look at the other side. And here's the problem as I see it. There are literally thousands of white American Christian congregations, and that's my context, so I'll just speak from what I know, who will gather this Sunday in worship, and they will enter into an experience of awe. They will ascribe the divine presence to that feeling of awe. And then they will likely pray for divine blessing on President Trump. later on that day, they might go work for the reelection of the president, and work for things that I would say oppose justice, that oppose the rights of workers, that oppose the things that I would define as part of my own religious tradition. So I guess I just want to name that tension as part of our exercise tonight, this conversation. And maybe it's as much of a confession that I find it troubling to be a part of a tradition, all of which are under the umbrella of Christianity, of worship, of awe, but could be moved to work so differently in the world. So I just want to end by going back to that Sequoia moment. I'm at that founders group in Sequoia, and that moment, it really helped me a lot. I found myself standing still and immobilized in the presence of giants, and it did something in me. That immobility actually contributed to my mobility. I came home refreshed, re-energized, ready again to recommit myself to the ongoing work for justice. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate you bringing up that tension, which I know we're going to get into more, and also the sense of this having different meanings for different people, and then the way that it can be generative. And it's part of my desire to do this series was that when I think like, well, what does the world need right now? I'm like, more wonder and awe. And for that exact reason that you ended on. And there, without a doubt, there are tensions. And as we tried to just craft even the description for this evening, we kept bumping into all sorts of tensions, which I find fascinating. And to me, that's like, okay, this is a good topic. So Christy, I think you might be taking us towards some of your recent research and also your own sense of wonder or awe.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. Thanks for having us here tonight. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. I really love how David got us started. And just a little side note, when the four of us met about a month ago, I guess, to kind of talk about what we would be talking about, we all realized, well, Christopher and I realized that at one point we were very interested in the ministry. I never quite got there, but I think that's something that connects the three of us. I am not a pastor, but I am someone who aspired to be, who ended up becoming a scholar of religion. There's a lot of reasons for that. So yeah, so I'm going to take the tactic of, I'm going to talk about the grotesque a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about the grotesque and how that can be a point of awe and wonder. I'm an anthropologist of religion. In all of my work, I've been really drawn to, I've been thinking about why, but I've been drawn to getting down in the dirt, crawling around in faith courses that my interlocutors make, trying to understand why they crawl through the dirt to get an understanding of Jesus's trials, for example. I've mostly worked with Christian Latinos and white Christian Americans in my research. So I'm an outsider to their religious worlds, but I try to be really empathetic. One of the ways that I try to be empathetic is getting dirty. And a recent moment, Jen asked us to talk a little bit about a recent moment of awe and wonder, was a research that I conducted over the last several years for a forthcoming book, where I immersed myself in a couple meatpacking plants in Iowa. I wanted to understand the intersectionalities of migration, the new migrations we're seeing in our state, the new migrations of refugees, individuals from the Northern Triangle. And I also want to understand how the intersections of work, migration, and religion played together. And it was one of my priest friends who said, I really think you need to go inside of one of the packing plants, because a lot of my interlocutors have been talking, work at Tyson and some of the other many packing plants in our state. And so my moment of awe and wonder, I'll never forget, I wasn't able to take a picture because I wasn't allowed to take photographs during the field work. But when I was in the Tyson Columbus Junction plant, I was suited up. I had the white frock. I had my hard hat, helmet. I had kind of pre-PPE stuff. It wasn't quite the PPEs that we're talking about now, protective gear with the shields, but I had a version of that with a net on my hair and things like that. I remember seeing what I later learned to be, and talked with her, an African refugee from the DNC, had a saw and she was sawing through the body of, like a 2,000-pound sow. And it might not sound like that would be a moment of awe and wonder, but there were a lot of sights and sounds. There was blood, there was flesh, there was noise. And I came to this place to understand better the hard work that these men and women are doing for the rest of us and what they go through. And I remember thinking, I remember feeling thrilled. I had this sense of thrill, and I couldn't move. And in a way, what David was describing, in the Sequoia forest, not being able to move his body, I was stuck. I couldn't move. I was just transfixed watching this woman. And it almost felt like a holy moment. Here I was in a place that one could say is deeply profane. It's a place where 10,000 animals come to die a day. And I look at that and I critique that in the book. But if we bracket that and we look at the work that these men and women do, and the fact that all of the 100 or so men and women I interviewed over the past several years talked about how proud they are of the work that they do. They're proud that they come home covered in blood. They're proud that they are providing for their families. They didn't want me to feel sorry for them. And so I really had to think about it. And I thought about the phenomenological and the existential realities of being in that place. And I do think that it was a holy moment. And I hadn't thought about it really until I really listened to David share that right now. But I felt like here's a woman who's providing for her family, a single mom. She's doing work that no one I know would ever do because we have white privilege. Here's a woman who's providing for her family. She's proud of the work that she does, and she's covered in blood and flesh. And so a recent moment for me of awe and wonder was being immersed in what we might normally think of as the grotesque. And part of unpacking the field work for me has been really reconciling. David brought up tensions, right? For me, the tensions have been reconciling the sacred, what I am interpreting as the sacredness of this place, and the blood sacrifice that occurs here. There's a lot of philosophers of religion who write about this, like René Girard is one, sort of the violence and the sacred of religion. This is an incredibly violent place, but I think it's a place where the sacred happens and where religion can be at work. And I can talk about that more later, but yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of moments of being in nature, and I love David's story. I think it's beautiful. And in some ways for me, and I know it might sound strange, being in the Packing Planet Tyson for the several visits I made, and then having a week immersion in Iowa premium beef, were real moments of awe and wonder for me. And I've been thinking a lot about why is that? And I think for me as an anthropologist who wants to understand the lives of religious men and women, whether they be Catholics, evangelical Christians, Jehovah's Witnesses, or non-denominational or not religious. I mean, I think that using my body and immersing myself bodily in their life worlds, what existentialist anthropologists would call life worlds, has been really important. I've had to get dirty over the years. I've done field work in a medium to maximum security prison for my last book. I got head lice, and that was pretty grotesque in a lot of ways. But by getting head lice, I know sounds really awful, but that have their prison lice that have like they're resistant to being treated because they exist in prisons, right? It gave me a deep empathy for these women and what they go through and the carceral state that I would have never gotten if I hadn't had this embodied experience, which yes, indeed we can think of as grotesque, but led to an awe and wonder and a shared sense of humanity. In this case, with these women in this medium maximum security prison in Southern Indiana, more recently with the refugees who work in the various packing plants throughout our state. And so I hope I didn't freak anybody out, but with the grotesque, but I've been thinking a lot about the role of the grotesque in awe and wonder. And that's something that I'm really contending with in this new book. And I think the next project will also continue this looking at embodiment and the grotesque as well. So thanks for this opportunity. I look forward to more conversations and hearing from Dr. Christopher Rasheem McMillan. So,
Christopher, yeah, go ahead.
That was all so very touching and insightful. And thank you all for being a part of a conversation. I can't hold the excitement. as a mover who sees the body, both the body in movement, whether that's transgressing social norms or transgressing boundaries, artificial boundaries created by states or powers, the sense of movement feels to me to be at the heart of the humanities and at the heart of the arts and at the heart of religion broadly, because our body is the tool and the medium for which we mediate our experiences. And as a dancer, I find that there's I'm fighting against a kind of losing battle between time and space. That is, I'm working with a decaying machine that just as I am mastering it, it is depleting itself and it's breaking down simultaneously. And so there are these moments where it both makes me want to think about the ways in which social factors, sort of social location, gender, sexual orientation, so forth and so on, impact the way in which we move through space more broadly. And for me, there is a resistance and a comfortability with failure, and that the body cannot do what I'd call extra human or superhuman things. So a moment of awe I have experienced aligned in my body is tilt on tilt. So my torso is over on one part and my leg is in the diagonal, and I'm on 2 centimeters of body material, and I'm standing in alignment with my leg in the air, which is, to me, feels like a superhuman feat. Now, of course, I've trained to be able to do that, but in that moment, I feel expansive and alive and awed, and awed in a way because my body felt or tends to move beyond the sort of logical mind. My mind may be saying, oh, we don't know if you can do this, but my body is like, we've been training for this, boom. And in that moment, for me at least, the stretching the human capability of my body feels to be all-like. So as a sort of juxtaposition to stillness, movement feels to me to be like, and particularly against what we may know to be true about gravity. And somehow it becomes it reveals itself, or it becomes mobilized as an awe, because it is very hard to do again, because the body is depleting and is weaker than it was the day before. And so when I am sort of conceptualizing and thinking about, at least from my research and where I'm saying the body is a central key, and how the body is interacted with by various social forces and social powers, and that it's worth teasing apart, it's worth investigating. The Syrian refugee crisis, moving bodies through space, through time, is a choreographic act. The ability to be able to healthily navigate space during COVID is a choreographic act, and requires choreographic thinking and planning and decision-making. How to find pleasure in the effort of the body, the exhaustion of the body, seems to be also a choreographic act. And I, since my arrival at Iowa, I have been worshiping and participating in Sanctuary Community Church where David pastors. And one of the big distinctions I guess I can draw from my own evangelical African-American tradition is that God is now, like he's ever present and present in my new congregation that I'm a part of too. But it feels as if he or she's tipping right into the very present, and that I could reach out and touch him or her, and that there's a sense of like, not in the Reformation a long ago, but like, I'm hungry and God will feed me today. A kind of need to rely on the body's need to rely on the divine and the sacred. And so I think that's a perfect place for me to stop.
Thank you. So as we were talking through this, like in our earliest conversations, really hearing the double entendre of some of the words that we're playing with. So movement being what part of what Christopher was just talking about. And I love the choreography of COVID, you know, when you're walking down the sidewalk and your neighbor's coming one way and everybody all of a sudden, you know, does this like this new COVID walking dance. But so movement and then also the double entendre with labor and various kinds of laboring. And it's interesting because I've been working on this project about joy, and somebody who sent in a piece for the book is works as an escort at a women's clinic. And she sent this photo where she's got this big rainbow umbrella, and she's got, you know, there's definite like joy in the moment and working with these people and so on, but she's also like, it is a labor to be here. It is taking my time. It is me being out in the cold or the rain or the heat. And it is labor that is taking me away from a different labor. So there's all these ways in which these words collide and intersect. So each of you is involved in social justice activities. And so share your experience, please, about this being embodied work and a form of labor. And we don't have an order here, so whoever feels like coming off mute.
I think when bodies are on the line, in particularly, or I think most around queerness and sort of hate crimes and/or Black Lives Matters, that the immediacy of what's happening feels that it is life and death. Like these aren't sort of cute academic treaties that we can write silently. Is that because people's lives are on the line, because it's so serious, it requires a kind of embodiment and a kind of presence. I think I choose presence over embodiment, a kind of presence and attention to resistance, and that the very body must resist kinds of social oppressions. And so to put one's body on the line, both metaphorically and in a dance sort of way, is to really is to use what I consider a very primal, guttural and sophisticated tool to resist oppression. And that when your body's on the line and other bodies are on the line, it's a corporal body on the line, and it becomes less about a singular body and much more about a body, or a movement's body, or a body of a movement, so to speak. And so, and in my work, I feel often I'm trying to convince people to attend to the body, to attend to the actual phenomenological lived experience of the body. You don't need a new proof. You don't need a new citation. You don't need nobody else's book. How you are experiencing it is indeed the proof and the reality of it.
Yeah, I would love to pick up on what Christopher just shared. So it's a bit different this semester, but over the years, I've been taking students to the Catholic Worker House here. And just a shout out to Emily Sinwell and David Goodner over there and their crew of amazing workers. I've long been a fangirl of Dorothy Day, and I got to meet her youngest granddaughter, Kate Hennessy, when she came to campus a few years ago, and I was seriously fangirling. But what Christopher was saying, I mean, I think for me, so in these classes that I teach for gender, women, sexuality studies, and social justice, we can read. It's important to read about social justice theory, and it's important for the students to have the background and to get the genealogy of so many humans who are doing this important work. But it's another thing, and I think it's a crucial next step, you know, for the students to go buy some food. We go as a group to Costco and we buy the food. We go to the worker house. We spend an afternoon there. We cook, we clean, we sit with the guests. For many of the students, the first time they've talked to a homeless person, right? Or talked to a refugee. And I think it's a form of witnessing, right? And it's a form of embodied witnessing, it's a form of presence. And I think that's been the most impactful. Not that the readings aren't impactful, but I think that, taking it the next step and immersing the students into the life worlds of folks who have been forgotten by society, have been spit on, who have been shunned, is really, really powerful. And I'm teaching one of the practicums this semester, and it's taken a different course because of COVID. So the students are mostly doing their practicums online, and we're really feeling a sense of loss because of, you can do that. We've talked a lot about how does one do the work of social justice in a time of a pandemic, because I can't require the students to go to the worker house. And I myself am not going right now. And it's hard, right? It's hard. But I'm already gearing up and looking forward to hopefully next fall where we can do this. But I do think that physical presence, the making of meals, the being present, and the witnessing, the embodied witnessing, is such an important part of, for me, for pedagogy. And it's what's probably one of the most meaningful parts for students, at least, of the class, when they actually get to go there. And that's when they really also get their white privilege. They really get it in ways that maybe they didn't before when we were reading the theory and the text. So yeah, so just my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, and Christy, thank you. And I appreciate you using that word witness. I was thinking the exact same thing as I heard Chris reflecting. It's about, I think, having that presence, that immediacy, the proximity to that which you are witnessing and what happens in the midst of that proximity. So even your story being in the meat packing plant, Christy, that proximity that you were able to, be in, that allowed you access to that experience. I'm thinking back to a couple things just real quick. Poor People's Campaign is a national network, but I was part of the Iowa one. And one of their key strategic programs is to do a hearing, which is simply creating a space where the people most impacted by injustice share. They share their story. This is what's happening to me. And just that showing up, having people hear, having people speak, it's powerful. I mean, it's a very, very powerful exchange that happens in those spaces. So that was powerful for me. And then just shout out to the Iowa Freedom Riders right here in Johnson County and Iowa City, who I think have really led the way throughout the summer and continue to in the kind of work we're showing up, being embodied, and then providing a platform where those most impacted by local injustice have a chance to name it and talk about it, and then create demands out of that work, demands that I think could be very life-giving and fruitful for our whole community.
So we have one other question that we sort of decided on as a group, and then if folks are here and they want to start dropping questions into the Q&A, please feel free. And this question gets back to some extent, David, you talked about that awe in the Sequoia Grove, then refreshed you and refueled you, to go and do certain kinds of work. But then that there's this tension between who gets to do what work. And it was interesting so part of my work at Obermann is whenever we have events is trying to find an image that will go with that event. And I really struggled because there were either images that like completely romanticized certain kinds of labor, or that that were almost, you felt you were invading the person's space by looking at it. And the image that I ended up using, I found intriguing. It's a photo that Ansel Adams took during the Japanese-American internment during World War II. And it's taken from afar. I'm not quite sure how he took it. I doubt there was like a drone involved, but and it's people working in these fields in California, and in the background are just, you know, the classic California mountains, and it's gorgeous. And in this day and age where we spend so much of our time, some of us, behind computers, it's compelling. It's a compelling image. And then you think about who is in that image, and it you know, shifts the entire thing. So it points to this way in which some of us are involved in forms of very physically taxing labor to maintain a common norm for the rest of us. And this has been especially pertinent and apparent during COVID. So if you could reflect on this tension between these very real pleasures and wonder of this embodied labor, and then the ways in which there is also this imbalance. And again, anybody who wants to jump in and go first.
I feel like I'm talking too much, but
Oh.
I feel this so deeply, Jen. I have the privilege, I can work from home pretty much all year. I can teach online. My friends who work in the plant don't have that privilege, you know. The Burmese, many of the Burmese families who work at, so Tyson in Columbus Junction, I think I can share this with you. I think it's public domain. I don't know, hopefully I won't get anybody in trouble, but the reason why the Tyson plant shut down for those 2 weeks wasn't necessarily because of the altruism of the CEOs and CFOs who are, you know, I know these folks, you know, I think they care about the workers, but they needed to be prodded. Workers literally just stopped showing up. Burmese families are like, wait a minute, you know, think about it, right? Refugee families tend to live in, you know, multi-generational homes where COVID could spread very, very easily. And these are families, you know, Latino families, Burmese families, African refugees families who are like, we're not going to take the risk. We'd rather not get a paycheck for 2 weeks, right? So the churches, the local churches, religious organizations, there's an interfaith group with Catholics, Pentecostals, Mennonites, and some pastors even from outside of Columbus Junction, you know, had a big, you know, food drive, and they, you know, took food to families. And so it was a real community effort. But here are like people who are, you know, it's already very difficult, dangerous work to begin with. And I certainly don't want to romanticize it by saying I had awe and wonder, which I certainly did, but this is a really difficult job, made more difficult with the spread of COVID, right? And so these are folks who just didn't take a paycheck for a few weeks, literally forced the hand of the corporation to install the plexiglass shields in the lunchroom in between workers who have less than, you know, 3 feet in between them. And so it was the workers, kind of going back to, you know, David bringing up workers and, you know, workers taking charge. And so it wasn't altruism of the company. And I think a lot about big corporations and how in my white, liberal, educated world, I mean, we certainly have our complaints, right? And we have systems of power. But, you know, when I think about my friends, my interlocutors in Columbus Junction, in Tama, Iowa, at Iowa Premium Beef, I mean, these are real dangerous systems of power that they're coming up against, and they don't have a safety net. And the safety net oftentimes are local religious leaders who have stepped up, folks like David, you know, right here, our very own David, who, you know, step up and do the work and who do the witnessing, you know, the hands and feet of Christ. And so I see that, you know, I see that, and I see corporations, and I see, so I'm really struggling with this. I'm struggling with, you know, my own white privilege in the midst of coronavirus, the fact that I'm not doing the hands-on social justice work that I normally do, but trying to do it in other ways, you know. But yeah, it's a moment, I think, really, for me at least, to be self-reflexive, to really recognize my privilege and to try to do even more about that. Yeah, so that's just, I'm really glad you asked. That's a really great question. Thank you for that.
I think what I'm first drawn to is less of the labor and more of the bodies that are occupying the labor, and the race and the genders of those particular bodies. And as much as I want to concentrate on the effortfulness of it, the sort of stratification is not all labor is equal. And in some ways, particular bodies are vulnerable and are disposable bodies. And so, or perceived to be disposable bodies. And so I'm particularly attuned to the ways in which race has a way of both dehumanizing, or let me rephrase, not race in and of itself, but the ways in which structures of whiteness have impacted brown and Black bodies have a way of dehumanizing those bodies. And so to be in inhumane conditions like a meatpacking plant and to be treated inhumanely have a connection between both the way we treat animals and the way we treat people who are thought to be different from us, first and foremost. So there's something there that tingles for me. And I think the sort of piece around Christianity, as a practitioner myself, I find that if I'm around everyone and we are all sort of in agreement, I'm often in a disagreement about the agreement, because in some ways, when I'm thinking back and just generally about scripture, it's wash feet, it's do this, it's give, it's directives, and it's an embodied directives. If one can believe that a half divine man is walking around healing people and raising the dead, if that's your jam, then from that very place, then it's a call to the body, and so you know less about humility of feet washing from an ocular reading of the text, and you know a whole lot more about it when you wash somebody's feet, and particularly if their feet are not clean, then you really know something about humility that cannot be taught from an ocular reading. And so to circle around, to echo David's earlier sentiment, I think several white churches are praying fervently and are like aligned in this thinking that is not actually connected to the humanity of people. And I'm often reminded of the Dutch Reformed Church participation in apartheid, is that a church can really be wrong and can be heading in a direction that's not healthy or godlike, and convince everyone around them that is the truth, and particularly if it benefits you. So for me, I'm often trying to struggle with, like, how does my male privilege benefit me? How does my educational privilege benefit me and create stratifications between me and other people? And it's a hard and difficult pill to swallow for me.
Oh, yes to both of those, Christy and Chris. Again, yeah, I actually don't know that I have a ton more to add to this, but I just want to give another shout out to another organization locally. That's the Center for Worker Justice, that has been working tirelessly to highlight some of the tensions around labor, and who's doing what and why. And one of the programs they actually enacted right at the beginning of the pandemic, when federal stimulus checks were sent out, there were a number of local people here, our neighbors, who were not eligible to receive those checks. And so the Center for Worker Justice asked for those who would receive stimulus checks who really didn't need it, because they were in jobs, in work that continued, that they could then gift those stimulus checks to Center for Worker Justice. All of the funds would go directly to families impacted who were not eligible to receive those stimulus checks. This is a type of program, it does not change the system, but it does address some of the imbalance. So I love that idea, and yes to that idea, yes to then changing the systems, right? That make those imbalances real in the first place.
I'm really glad you said that, and it brings me to the title that Jen imagined for this, Little Resurrections, because I think sometimes it does get overwhelming. It's like, oh my God, there's these entrenched systems of injustice and imbalance of power and anti this, and I think, you know, my students and I talk about this all the time. One of the students in my practicum right now contacted an agency because she knows there are a lot of homeless individuals who have dogs, and the dogs are cold now. And these homeless individuals, you know, their pets are their family and they keep them safe and warm. And so she took it, Madison, she contacted a place out east that makes coats for dogs, and they sent her a big box full of coats. And so she's providing coats. And so we talked about sometimes it's the little things that can mean a lot. And that's the praxis, that's doing the work. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think sometimes I find students, myself and my students here, get so overwhelmed because we feel like we're not doing enough. And so that example that you gave from the Center for Worker Justice is a beautiful example uh, of, I don't know, of so many beautiful things that it makes me want to cry. And I see this with our students. I see our students doing these things constantly to make a difference, and that gives me hope. I know I did notice a question down there about the election cycle and
Yeah.
on
Oh,
Wonder. I think about I see my students and the amazing work that they're doing. They give me hope. You know, my children give me hope when I start to get really down about things. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, David. That was great.
yeah. And I have to admit, I'm sorry, I haven't led on this webinar platform before, so I don't know if beyond the four of us, if everybody can see the Q&A, but Brett Cloyd asks, says, great talk, thank you. I've been thinking about the concluding general election, which has felt more awful than full of awe. Do you have ideas about how these ideas of On Wonder and work might fill the post-election period?
I do, but it's not so hopeful. It's more sterning than anything.
We need
Is
that.
that there?
We need that, Chris. Keep going. Yes.
Thank you, David. I love a good amen. Um, is that certain bodies cannot turn from it, right? Like there are certain particular bodies that will not be okay. There are people who will not actually be okay and who will not get a rest from it, who will encounter oppression every day. And so there's a hope. I think there's a hope that we can stand. Well, we are invited. We can find ourselves invited to stand by people who cannot turn away from racism as it rages forward, despite whatever will happen in the days to come. And we cannot turn away from the violence against women, despite what will come, what may or may not happen in the future. Is that certain bodies do not get rest. That is an ongoing struggle. And having said that, I think the arc of the universe bends towards justice. I really do. And even if I won't see it in my lifetime, and even if I thought I was going to see it, and all of a sudden we rewind and went back 30 years ago, I still believe that we will see it because that we're pushed towards inclusion rather than exclusion.
I want to pick up on that real quick, and just because the first half of that quote, Chris, from Dr. King, you know, the moral arc of the universe is long. And I kind of want to just end the quote right there for just a moment. You know, the moral arc of the universe is long. And so what that means is that we can expect to work. We can expect that it will be long. And so no matter what happens this election cycle, you know, let's commit again to the work. Now, having said that, we have to find ways to take care of ourselves, to find joy despite all the facts, as Wendell Berry says, to take moments for awe and wonder, you know, and find places to be re-energized. That has to be part of our practice, and find good people we can do it with. But it's long.
Are there other questions that people want to drop into the Q&A. And also if any of you have questions for each other that have arisen during the past 45 minutes.
Well, so I have a question for, I guess, both of you, but Chris used the word training. And I would love to hear each of you reflect on that a little bit, like training for, and I'm just intrigued, like, could there be a training for awe? Can we train ourselves into awe? I mean, we know we can train ourselves into body and work and labor, but what about awe and work? What do you think?
I think so. I move around a lot and I'm kind of impatient. So I don't think I'm the best case study. But when I did attend Quaker meetings, I think the Quakers are really good at this. I think the Quakers, my friends, capital F friends, the Society of Friends, right, in West Branch, my takeaway from my time going to Quaker meetings was that to take joy in everyday things. So even if we're washing dishes or we're cleaning up after our kids or we see a bird outside, I try harder to slow down because I'm always moving around. I drive my family crazy. I don't sit down very well. To really think about some of those Quaker readings that I had read. John Woolman, for example, some of the early, founders of Society of Friends, and slowing down and taking time to notice the everyday things. Whether it's a bird on the top of the tree in the backyard that my husband and I, when we drink coffee, we see it on top every morning. We feel like it's there for us. Or when I take my dog for a walk every day and we see new squirrels and groundhogs, I get really excited with her. So trying to sort of be okay in the moment and focusing on, again, it goes back to the body. All these things I'm talking about are embodied. So for me, rather than seeing like doing the dishes as drudgery and as a chore, I have a beautiful look into my backyard. And I think, God, I'm just so, thank you, God, for this beautiful backyard and for this day. And I'm so grateful that I have dishes to wash and food to eat. And I'm really grateful. And so for me, it's been slowing down, focusing on the things that my body does, and almost like seeing a sacramentalism there, to use kind of like that kind of idea, the sacramentalism of work. For me, understanding that more deeply has led to, I think, experiencing more awe and wonder during a really difficult time, right? COVID, we're all really suffering, right? I mean, in our various ways. So yeah, thanks, David.
Thanks, David. I think when I think about training, and from my particular location, it's for efficiency and ease. It's to make doing very difficult things easier. And they seem like they're easier, but they're not easier. I have just improved. And so generally for the first year dance students, I'm like a terror. They think I'm the worst. And they think I'm the worst is because I teach a very hard technical practice. And then in their senior year, they're like, we're bored in your class. And I'm like, actually, the class is hard. You have gotten better. That is why you are bored. It's not because I'm a boring teacher. And so I think it's to make the very difficult things easier. And so I think I have conversations like this with my partner a lot, who's a very hardworking dude. And I think there's a sense to borrow from the darkness of tomorrow in preparation, like to brace for the darkness and miss the opportunities or like the God sparks of today. And for me, at least, darkness is coming in some form, in some way, no matter what. But if I have a rose right now, I'm gonna have this rose. No one ever, when they was about to meet the creators or whoever they worship or don't worship, thought, damn, I shouldn't have had that cupcake. No one is ever regretting that those joys in the end. They're like, I should have been with my kids more. I should have, but I say, eat the fucking cupcake, and let darkness worry about darkness tomorrow.
My turn to say amen.
Love it. That's awesome.
Well, we don't have any other questions in our little box over here, and we are at the hour pretty much. So thank you so much, all three of you. It was really delightful, wonderful to hear from you, and I appreciate you kicking off this series.
Thanks
So
so much.
yeah, thanks so much.
Bye,
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.